Clara stood by the stove, stirring a pot of watery soup, just enough to stretch for 3 more meals. She didn't say a word. She hadn't said much in weeks, not because she was angry, but because she was tired. Tired of pretending everything was fine when their dreams were crumbling faster than the plaster on their ceiling. Maybe I should just leave, Daniel muttered, more to himself than to her. Clara turned slowly, her eyes wide with disbelief. Leave, Daniel, we have children. Lucas just started school. Sophia still wakes up crying for you when you work late. Her voice cracked, not with anger, but with a quiet desperation that cut deeper than any shout ever could. I'm not giving them anything, he snapped, slamming his palm on the table. I'm failing them, Clara. Every day I come home empty-handed, and I see it in their eyes. They're waiting for a father who can fix things. But I can't. You're already their father, she whispered, stepping closer. That's enough. But Daniel wasn't listening. He was already lost in the shame of his own failure, convinced that love couldn't pay bills or fill empty stomachs. He looked at Clara, not as the woman who'd held him through layoffs, illnesses, and sleepless nights, but as a reminder of everything he hadn't become. A week later, he was gone. No note, no goodbye, just an empty closet and a silence so heavy it made the children cry without understanding why. Clara never told them he abandoned them. She said Daddy had to go away for work, that he loved them very much, and every night, before tucking them in, she kissed their foreheads and whispered, "One day, he'll come back." She didn't say it because she believed it. She said it because they needed to believe it. And Daniel, he boarded a bus with nothing but a duffel bag and a heart full of excuses. He told himself it was temporary, that he'd return once he'd made something of himself. But deep down, in the quiet corners of his soul, he refused to visit. He knew the truth: he hadn't left to find success. He'd left to escape shame. And in doing so, he left behind the only people who ever saw him as enough, even when he had nothing. Now, years later, standing in a tailored suit outside a grand hotel where crystal chandeliers glittered like promises, Daniel adjusted his cufflinks and smiled for the cameras. He was no longer the man who fled in the rain. He was Daniel Moretti, self-made entrepreneur, soon-to-be husband to Isabella Delgado, heir to a legacy of elegance and influence. His past was buried, or so he thought, because today, of all days, he'd done something cruel, not out of hatred, but out of pride. He'd sent an invitation to her, to Clara, not because he missed her, not because he wanted reconciliation, but because he wanted everyone to see the woman he'd left behind, the one who stayed poor while he soared, and know that he'd chosen wisely, that he'd escaped. He imagined her arriving in worn shoes, eyes downcast, shrinking under the weight of judgment. He pictured the whispers. That's his ex, the one he left. No wonder he moved on. It would be his final victory. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that Clara had spent the last 5 years not drowning in regret, but building a life from the wreckage he left behind. And tonight she wouldn't come broken. Corner, her lifeline, her sanctuary, her silent partner in survival. Outside, the city buzzed with indifference, but here, every stitch was a prayer. It was just past 6 in the morning. Sophia, still in her pajamas dotted with tiny stars, curled against her mother's side, clutching a stuffed rabbit with one ear chewed off. "Mama," she whispered, voice thick with sleep. "Why doesn't Daddy come to my school play?" Clara's hands stilled for just a heartbeat. She didn't look up right away. Instead, she smoothed the seam of the dress she was mending. A client's heirloom, delicate lace frayed at the edges. She took a breath, slow and steady, as if drawing strength from the very air. "Because grown-ups sometimes get lost, sweetheart," she said gently, finally meeting her daughter's eyes. "But that doesn't mean they don't love you." "But Lucas says he saw him last week, in a big car, with a lady." Clara's chest tightened, but her voice remained soft, unwavering. "People change paths, my love, but your heart, yours stays true. And that's what matters." From the doorway, Lucas appeared, backpack slung over one shoulder, his expression too old for 10 years. She's asking because Mrs. Alvarez said at parent-teacher night that I don't have a father listed on my emergency contact. Again. Clara set down her needle. She stood, brushing flour-dusted flour from her apron. She'd baked bread before dawn to save money, and walked to him. Kneeling, she cupped his face in her hands. Her palms were rough from work, but her touch was tender. "Listen to me," she said, her voice low but firm. "You have a father. His name is Daniel, and whether he shows up or not, you are not less. You are smart, kind, and brave. And you come from love. From my love, every single day." Lucas blinked hard, fighting tears he thought only little kids cried. Then why did he leave us? The question hung in the air like smoke. Thick, suffocating, impossible to ignore. Clara pulled both children into her arms, holding them as if she could shield their hearts with her own body. "I don't know, baby," she admitted, her voice trembling just slightly. Maybe he was scared. Maybe he thought he wasn't enough. But that was his fear, not yours, not mine, and certainly not ours together. She kissed the tops of their heads, breathing in the scent of their hair. Soap, sunshine, childhood. "We are enough just like this. Just us three." Later that day, after walking them to school, Sophia skipping ahead, Lucas glancing back to make sure she was still there, Clara returned to her room. The rent was due, the electricity bill had a red stamp, and the client who'd promised to pay for 3 dresses still hadn't called. She sat at her machine again, fingers numb, eyes burning. For a moment, she let herself lean forward, forehead resting on the cool wood of the table. One tear fell onto the fabric beneath her. Just one. Then she wiped it away, straightened her shoulders, and threaded the needle once more. Because giving up wasn't an option. Not when 2 small hearts beat in rhythm with hers. That evening, as she stirred beans on the stove, again, stretching them with rice and carrots, Sophia danced around the kitchen, humming a song from school. Lucas sat at the tiny table, doing homework under the glow of a second-hand lamp. "Mama," Sophia said suddenly, twirling until she was dizzy. "When I grow up, I'm going to buy you a house, with a garden, and a bathtub that fills all the way up." Clara laughed, the sound warm despite the ache in her bones. "Deal. But only if you promise to visit every Sunday." "I will, and I'll bring cake. Chocolate cake with extra sprinkles." Lucas looked up from his math worksheet. "And I'll be an engineer, so I can build bridges, and maybe fix things that are broken." Clara's breath caught. She didn't say anything. She just smiled, stirring the pot slowly, watching steam rise like ghosts of all the dreams she'd tucked away so theirs could grow. She never spoke ill of Daniel. Not once. Even when the neighbors gossiped. Even when the bank called. Even when loneliness wrapped around her like a winter coat she couldn't take off. Because she knew something deeper than bitterness: her children deserved to believe in love. Even if the man who gave them half their blood forgot how to show it. And so, day after day, she stitched, cooked, cleaned, hugged, listened, and loved with everything she had, even when it felt like nothing. She didn't know it yet, but her quiet strength was building something far more valuable than wealth. It was building dignity, resilience, grace, and soon, very soon, he'd done it. He'd clawed his way out of the shadows, out of that suffocating apartment, out of the shame that once clung to him like damp clothes. Now he was someone people admired, someone who mattered. Inside, soft piano music drifted through the open French doors. Isabella sat on the velvet chaise, flipping through swatches of silk for her wedding dress. Ivory, champagne, pearl white. "I think the champagne," she said without looking up. "It complements my skin tone, and your mother will adore it." Daniel smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Whatever you want, I say." She finally glanced at him, her gaze sharp beneath perfectly arched brows. "You've been quiet all week. Nervous?" "Not nervous," he said, stepping back inside, setting the glass down. "Just making sure everything's perfect. For us, she asked, rising gracefully, smoothing her designer slacks. For the image, he replied before he could stop himself. Isabella paused. A flicker of something, doubt, curiosity, crossed her face, but she masked it quickly with a practiced smile. Well, darling, this wedding isn't just a union. It's a statement. The Moretti-Delgado alliance will be talked about for years. He nodded, but his mind drifted. To a small kitchen. To a boy asking why his father never came to soccer games. To a woman who never begged, never cursed, never even raised her voice when he left. By the way, Isabella said casually, picking up an envelope from the marble table. Your assistant confirmed the guest list. Everyone's RSVP'd. Even her. Daniel froze. Clara. She actually said yes. Isabella's tone was light, almost amused. I have to admit, I'm surprised. I assumed she'd have too much pride, or too little means, to show up. Daniel's throat tightened. He hadn't expected her to come. He'd sent the invitation as a silent dare, a cruel flourish to prove how far he'd risen and how far she'd fallen. But now she was coming. Good, he said, forcing confidence into his voice. Let her see what real success looks like. Isabella studied him, her eyes narrowing slightly. You really think she'll come alone in that old coat she probably still wears? I don't care how she comes, Daniel said, turning back to the window. As long as she sees the life I built without her. But deep down, a cold thread of unease coiled in his gut, because part of him, the part he buried under tailored suits and boardroom victories, remembered the way Clara used to look at him. Not with admiration for his achievements, but with quiet faith in his soul. And that kind of look, it couldn't be bought or replaced. 2 days later, at the final fitting, Isabella's seamstress adjusted the train of her gown while she scrolled through her phone. Oh, she murmured, pausing. Interesting. Daniel, waiting nearby with a coffee he hadn't touched, looked up. What? Your ex just posted something. She turned the screen toward him. It wasn't a photo of herself. Just a simple image, 2 small hands holding a single white rose. Beneath it, a caption. Some roots grow deeper in silence. No mention of the wedding. No bitterness. Just peace. Daniel stared at the screen longer than he should have. His chest felt tight, as if something inside him was waking up after years of sleep. That night he dreamed of rain, of a kitchen table, of a child's voice asking, Daddy, are you coming home? He woke drenched in sweat, heart pounding. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear. A perfect day for a new beginning, everyone said. Daniel stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his cufflinks, the same ones his grandfather had given him. He looked polished, impeccable, untouchable, but as he fastened the last button, his reflection seemed to blur. For a split second, he didn't see the successful groom. He saw the man who ran, the man who left his children wondering if they were enough. He shook his head, banishing the thought. Today wasn't about the past. Today was about legacy, power, perfection. And yet, as the limousines began arriving at the estate, as guests in couture gowns and bespoke suits mingled under string lights, Daniel found himself scanning the driveway, waiting, not with longing but with dread, because somewhere out there, Clara was coming. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried over him in years, but her hands trembled as she set it on the kitchen table, right beside Sophia's half-finished drawing of their family, a stick-figure trio holding hands under a smiling sun. Lucas found it first when he came home from school. Why did he send this, he asked, voice tight. Eyes narrowed like he already knew the answer. Clara didn't lie. Not anymore. Because he wants people to see me there, she said softly, folding laundry with steady hands. And he thinks I'll look small. Sophia, perched on a stool, swung her legs nervously. Are we going? Clara paused. The question hung in the air like a fragile glass orb. One wrong word, and it would shatter. I don't know, baby. That night, after tucking them in, she sat alone in the dim glow of the lamp, turning the invitation over and over. Part of her wanted to tear it up, to throw it in the trash and pretend it never existed. But another part, the part that remembered how Daniel used to sing lullabies off-key, how he'd once carried Lucas on his shoulders through a park just to make him laugh, ached with something deeper than anger. It was grief, for the man he could have been, for the family they almost kept. Then the phone rang. It was Mrs. Delaney, the elderly widow who'd hired Clara to restore her late husband's wedding suit. "I heard," she said simply, her voice warm but firm, "about the invitation." Clara stiffened. "How small world, dear. My niece works at the venue." She mentioned certain expectations. Clara closed her eyes. "He wants to humiliate me." "No," Mrs. Delaney said gently. "He wants to convince himself he's better than you. But you've already won. You just don't know it yet." A week later, a package arrived. No return label, just Clara's name in neat cursive. Inside a deep emerald dress, simple but elegant, cut to flatter without shouting. Silk, not satin. Class, not costume. And a note, wear it not for him, but for you. And for them. Clara touched the fabric, tears finally spilling over. Not from sadness, but from the quiet shock of being seen. The morning of the wedding, she woke before dawn. She bathed slowly, braided Sophia's hair with tiny white ribbons, helped Lucas polish his second-hand shoes until they gleamed. She didn't tell them about the dress. She let them wonder. "Will Daddy be happy to see us?" Sophia asked, wide-eyed, as Clara fastened the last button of her own simple blouse before slipping into the emerald gown. Clara knelt, cupping her daughter's face. "We're not going to make him happy, sweetheart. We're going to show him who we are. And that's enough." At 4 p.m., a black limousine pulled up outside their building. The driver stepped out, hat in hand. "Mrs. Clara Moretti," she blinked. "It's just Clara now." He smiled. "Still a queen to those who know." As they drove through the city, Lucas pressed his forehead to the window, silent. Sophia clutched Clara's hand. "Mama, what if they laugh at us?" Clara looked at her children. Clean, calm, cared for, loved. "Then they'll be laughing at the wrong people." When the gates of the estate came into view, ivy-covered arches, valets in crisp uniforms, guests sipping champagne under fairy lights, Clara's pulse quickened. But she didn't look away. She sat taller, straighter. Inside the car, she took a slow breath, not of fear, of resolve, because she wasn't coming as the woman he left behind. She was coming as the mother who stayed, the woman who built a home from nothing, the one who taught her children that dignity isn't worn, it's lived. And as the limo slowed at the grand entrance, where photographers waited and guests turned with curious stares, Clara smoothed her dress, squeezed her children's hands, and whispered, "Remember, we walk in with our heads high, not because we want their approval, but because we owe ourselves that much." Outside, the murmurs began before the door even opened. "Is that her, the ex?" In a limo, Daniel, standing near the fountain with Isabella on his arm, froze mid-sentence. His glass stopped halfway to his lips. His breath caught like a stone in his throat. Because walking toward him, calm, composed, radiant not in jewels but in quiet strength, was Clara. And beside her, holding her hands like anchors in a storm, were his children. They weren't hiding. They weren't ashamed. They were arriving. And in that moment, Daniel realized with a sickening lurch in his chest, he hadn't invited her to shame her. He'd invited her to judge him. Daniel stood frozen, his champagne flute forgotten, condensation dripping onto his polished shoes. Isabella's grip on his arm tightened, her nails pressing just enough to sting. "What is she doing here?" she hissed under her breath, smile still perfectly in place for the crowd. But Daniel couldn't answer. His eyes were locked on Sophia, who looked up at the grand floral archway with wonder, then turned to Clara and whispered, "Mama, it's like a castle." Clara bent slightly, brushing a stray curl from her daughter's forehead. "It is," she said softly. "But remember, castles have walls. Homes have open doors." Lucas, quieter, scanned the crowd until his gaze landed on Daniel. For a heartbeat, father and son simply looked at each other. No words, no gestures. Just years of silence stretching between them like a bridge made of glass. Then Lucas took a small step forward. Clara didn't stop him. She knew this moment wasn't hers to control anymore. Daniel's throat worked as his son approached. He wanted to say something grand, something that would erase the past 5 years in a single sentence. But all that came out was a hoarse, "Hey, buddy." Lucas stopped an arm's length away. "Hi, Dad." He shifted his weight. "You look different." "I clean up okay." Daniel tried to joke, but his voice cracked. Sophia, sensing the tension, tugged Clara's hand and walked over too, her eyes wide and innocent. "Daddy," she beamed, as if he'd only been gone a day. "I made you a card." She pulled a folded piece of construction paper from her pocket. Crayon hearts, glitter glue, and the words, "I love you even when you're far." Daniel's hands shook as he took it. He didn't open it. Not yet. He couldn't trust himself. Isabella finally stepped forward, her voice sweet but edged like porcelain. "Clara, how unexpected. We weren't sure you'd come." Clara met her eyes without flinching. "I wasn't sure either, but my children wanted to see their father on his special day. And I believe in honoring that wish, even when it's hard." A murmur rippled through the nearby guests. Some exchanged glances. Others looked away, suddenly fascinated by their drinks. Daniel finally found his voice. "You didn't have to come," he said quietly, almost pleading. Clara tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "No, I didn't, but I chose to, because I refuse to let shame dictate where I walk or who I am." Her words weren't loud, but they carried. Like wind through dry leaves, they stirred something uneasy in the room. Isabella's smile faltered. "Well, we're glad you're here," she said, though her eyes said otherwise. "Please, find your seat. The ceremony starts soon." She turned to lead Daniel away, but he didn't move. He was still staring at the card in his hand, his knuckles white. Clara didn't wait for permission. She guided her children toward the rows of chairs reserved for family. Yes, someone had actually placed their names on the seating chart. Clara, Lucas, and Sophia Moretti, as if they still belonged. An elderly woman in pearl earrings leaned toward her neighbor. "That's the ex-wife. She carries herself like royalty." "She raised those children alone," another whispered back, "while he chased fortunes." Clara sat, smoothing her dress, her posture calm, but inside her heart hammered. Not from fear of judgment, but from the raw vulnerability of being seen. Truly seen. After years of invisibility, of being the ghost in Daniel's success story, she was now standing in the center of his new life, fully present, fully human. Sophia leaned into her side. "Mama, are you sad?" Clara kissed the top of her head. "No, baby. I'm proud." "Of what of us?" Across the courtyard, Daniel watched them from behind a pillar, unable to join the receiving line. Isabella shot him a sharp look, but he barely noticed. All he could see was the way Lucas kept glancing back at him, hopeful, hesitant, waiting for a sign. And in that moment, Daniel realized the terrible truth. He hadn't invited Clara to humiliate her. He'd invited her because some broken part of him still needed her to witness his triumph, to validate that leaving was the right choice. But instead of a defeated woman in worn shoes, he got a queen in emerald silk, flanked by the two people who held the missing pieces of his soul. And now, as the string quartet began to play the processional, as guests rose and turned toward the aisle, Daniel stood at a crossroads. One path led to the altar, to a marriage built on image, ambition, and escape. The other led back to the truth he'd spent years running from. He didn't know which he'd choose, but as his eyes met Clara's one last time before the music swelled, he saw not anger, not vengeance, but quiet grace. Mental, even envious. But she didn't look around. She kept her gaze forward, anchored by the small hands gripping hers on either side. Sophia leaned closer, voice barely a whisper. "Mama, why is that lady looking at us like we're bugs?" Clara didn't turn to see who Sophia meant. She already knew. Isabella's mother, seated in the front row, had been casting icy glances their way since they arrived, as if their presence alone threatened the sanctity of this gilded occasion. Some people, Clara murmured, confuse kindness with weakness, and strength with rudeness. Lucas, ever observant, tilted his head. Do you think Dad regrets inviting us? Clara hesitated. Not because she didn't know the answer, but because she didn't want to burden him with it. I think he's realizing something, she said carefully. Sometimes when we try to prove we've moved on, we end up standing face to face with what we left behind. Before Lucas could ask more, a soft voice came from the aisle behind them. Clara, she turned. Mrs. Delaney stood there, elegant in a dove-gray suit, her silver hair swept into a neat bun. The woman who'd sent the dress. The one who'd seen her not as a discarded wife, but as someone worth believing in. You came, Clara breathed, rising slightly. I wouldn't miss it, Mrs. Delaney said, her eyes warm. She glanced at the children. And I brought something for them. She handed Sophia a small box wrapped in linen paper. Inside 2 delicate white roses, real but preserved in glass domes. For the little ones who bloom even in hard soil. Sophia gasped. They're beautiful. Lucas took his gently. Thank you, ma'am. Mrs. Delaney nodded, then lowered her voice so only Clara could hear. You look like you walked out of a dream, but don't mistake their silence for approval. They're watching, waiting to see if you'll crumble. Clara met her gaze. I won't. No, Mrs. Delaney agreed softly. Because you've already done the hardest part. You chose love over bitterness. That's a kind of power they'll never understand. Just then, the music shifted. The first notes of the bridal march began to swell. Guests turned toward the entrance. Isabella appeared at the end of the aisle, radiant in champagne silk, arm linked with her father. Cameras flashed. Smiles bloomed. But Daniel wasn't looking at her. He was staring straight at Clara. And in that shared glance, across rows of strangers, across years of silence, something passed between them. Not longing, not anger, but recognition. A silent acknowledgement that the story they thought was over was still being written. Isabella noticed. Her step faltered for half a second. Her smile tightened. She squeezed her father's arm, as if to remind everyone, including herself, who belonged here. As she walked past Clara's row, she slowed almost imperceptibly. Try not to cause a scene, she whispered, voice honeyed but sharp as glass. This day is about the future, not the past. Clara didn't flinch. She simply looked up, calm as still water. The past doesn't vanish just because you stop talking about it, Isabella. It lives in the eyes of your children, in the choices you make, in the way you treat those you think are beneath you. Isabella's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. She kept walking. The ceremony began. Vows were exchanged. Rings slid onto fingers. Promises made under chandeliers and applause. But Daniel's mind wasn't there. He kept seeing Sophia's card in his pocket. He kept hearing Lucas's quiet, "Hi, Dad." He kept remembering the way Clara used to hum while cooking, how she'd press her forehead to his when he came home exhausted and say, "You're enough, just as you are." Now, standing beside a woman who admired his success but didn't know his soul, he felt hollow. After the I-do's, as guests rose for the recessional, Daniel found himself drifting. Not toward the champagne fountain or the photo line, but toward the edge of the garden where Clara stood with the children, letting them chase fireflies that hadn't even appeared yet. He stopped a few feet away. "Can I walk with you for a minute?" Clara studied him. Not with suspicion, not with hope, just with clarity. "Only if you're ready to talk to me. Not the ghost of who you think I am." He swallowed. "I think I am." They walked slowly along the stone path, the children ahead of them, laughing at nothing and everything. "I didn't invite you to hurt you," Daniel finally said, voice raw. "But you did," Clara replied gently. "Not because you meant to, but because you forgot that people aren't props in your story. We're real. We feel. We remember." He stopped walking. "I've missed so much." "Yes," she said. "You have." A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant laughter of guests and the rustle of leaves. Then, from ahead, Sophia turned and called out, Daddy, look, a real firefly. Daniel looked at Clara, eyes glistening. Can I go see it with her? Clara nodded. Go. And as he actually ran, to catch up with his daughter, something inside Clara cracked open. Not pain, not regret, relief, because maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in gold and violet, the limousine that had brought them here waited quietly at the gate. Not as an escape, but as a promise. Was dancing too. But out here, near the old oak at the edge of the estate, time seemed to slow. Daniel knelt in the grass beside Sophia, cupping his hands around the tiny flicker of light she'd caught. See, she whispered, eyes wide with wonder. It's magic. He smiled, a real one, unguarded. It is. Lucas stood nearby, arms crossed, watching his father with cautious curiosity. He hadn't spoken much since the ceremony, but his silence wasn't cold. It was waiting. Clara lingered a few steps behind, arms wrapped around herself, not out of discomfort, but because her heart felt too full to contain. She watched Daniel gently open his palms so the firefly could rise again, watched Sophia squeal as it spiraled into the darkening sky. And in that moment, she saw not the man who left, but the boy he once was, before pride and fear twisted him. Then, from the terrace, a voice cut through the quiet like shattered glass. Daniel, darling, your speech is next. Isabella stood framed by the French doors, silhouette sharp against the warm light behind her. Her smile was perfect, her tone polite, but her eyes cold, calculating, locked onto Clara like a warning. Daniel stood slowly, brushing grass from his trousers. He looked at Clara, then at his children. I have to go. Sophia tugged his sleeve. Will you come back? He hesitated. I'll try. But Lucas spoke up, voice low but steady. You always say that. The words landed like stones. Daniel flinched. Clara stepped forward, placing a hand on Lucas's shoulder. It's okay, she said softly. Then to Daniel, go. Do what you need to do. He nodded, but his feet wouldn't move. Not yet, because something had shifted. The script he'd written for this day, the triumphant groom, the forgotten past, was unraveling. And in its place stood a truth he couldn't ignore. These children weren't ghosts. They were flesh and blood and longing. And they were his. Inside the grand tent, guests were seated at long tables draped in ivory linen. Centerpieces of white peonies and gold candles cast a dreamlike glow. At the head table, Isabella adjusted her veil, her expression unreadable as she watched Daniel approach. You took your time, she murmured as he sat her day. I was with my kids, he said simply. A beat of silence. Then, with a brittle laugh, they're not your kids tonight, Daniel. Tonight, you belong to me. He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, he saw not the poised heiress, but a woman who measured love in appearances, loyalty in obedience. And he wondered, had he chosen her because he loved her, or because she reflected the man he wanted to be? The MC tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the groom for his speech. Applause rose. Daniel stood, smoothing his jacket, gripping the note cards in his pocket. Carefully rehearsed lines about destiny, partnership, new beginnings. But as he faced the crowd, his eyes drifted past the sea of designer gowns and tailored suits, straight to the back row. There they were, Clara, sitting tall, Sophia leaning against her, Lucas watching him with those quiet, knowing eyes. His throat tightened. He pulled out the cards, then folded them and placed them on the podium. I didn't write much, he began, voice rougher than he intended, because I thought I knew what this day was about. Success, status, a fresh start. He paused, swallowed. But today, someone reminded me that real success isn't measured in bank accounts or headlines. It's measured in moments, in showing up, in staying. A murmur rippled through the room. Isabella's smile froze. My children are here tonight, Daniel continued, his voice gaining strength. Not because I invited them to witness my happiness, but because their mother taught them that love doesn't keep score. That even when someone walks away, you still hold the door open, just in case they find their way back. Tears welled in Sophia's eyes. Lucas sat up straighter. And I realize now, Daniel said, looking directly at Clara, that I've been running from the one thing that could have made me truly successful, being the man my family needed me to be. Isabella's hand shot out, gripping his arm under the table. Daniel, stop, she hissed through clenched teeth. This isn't the time. But he didn't stop. Maybe I can't undo the past, he said, voice breaking. But I can choose what comes next. And I choose to be present, to be honest, to be worthy, not of applause, but of their trust. Silence fell thick, stunned, sacred. Then, from the back, Sophia stood up and clapped. Just once, then again. Lucas joined her. And then, slowly, Mrs. Delaney rose to her feet. Then another guest, and another, until half the room was standing. Not for the groom's wealth or charm, but for the raw, trembling courage of a man finally facing his truth. Isabella remained seated, her face pale, her future crumbling in real time. And Clara, she didn't clap. She just looked at Daniel with tears streaming silently down her cheeks. Not of sadness, but of release. Isabella didn't move. She sat perfectly still, her gloved hands folded in her lap, her face a mask of polished composure, but her eyes burned with something colder than anger, betrayal. Not because he'd spoken of his children, but because he'd exposed the hollowness beneath their perfect union in front of everyone who mattered. You've made a spectacle, she said quietly as he returned to his seat. Her voice sharp enough to draw blood. Was that your intention, to humiliate me on our day? Daniel looked at her, not with defiance, but with sorrow. I didn't mean to hurt you, I say, but I couldn't stand up there and pretend my life began when I met you. Didn't. It fractured long before, and I've been lying to myself ever since. She turned away, jaw clenched. Then go. Go be the hero they think you are. But don't expect me to wait while you play house with the past. He didn't argue. He just stood, walked past the stunned guests, past the untouched champagne flutes, past the cake that now seemed like a monument to a future that would never be, and headed straight for the back of the tent. Clara was already gathering the children's things, her movements calm but urgent, as if she sensed the storm coming. Don't leave yet, Daniel said, his voice raw. She paused but didn't turn. We've seen what we came to see, Daniel. You spoke your truth. That's enough. It's not enough for me, he whispered, stepping closer. Not anymore. Sophia looked up at him, eyes wide. Are you coming with us? The question hung in the air like a fragile bird, hopeful, trembling. Lucas watched him, arms crossed, waiting for the familiar retreat, the empty promise, the slow fade into silence. Daniel knelt again, this time in front of both of them. I can't undo the years I missed, he said, voice cracking. But I can start tonight. If you'll let me. Clara finally faced him. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but steady. What does that mean? Daniel, a weekend visit, a birthday card next year, because we've had those before, and they don't fill the space where a father should be. I know, he said, swallowing hard, and I don't expect forgiveness, but I'm asking for a chance to show up every day, to school plays, soccer games, bedtime stories, even when it's messy, even when I mess up. Lucas studied him for a long moment. Then, quietly, why now, why not last year or the year before? Because the question deserved honesty. Daniel answered without flinching. Because I thought success would make me feel whole. But standing up there, seeing you two in that crowd, I realized I've been building a life on sand. And the only thing real, the only thing that ever mattered, was what I left behind. Tears spilled down Sophia's cheeks. She stepped forward and wrapped her small arms around his neck. I missed you, Daddy. Daniel held her tightly, his shoulders shaking. I missed you more than you'll ever know. Lucas didn't hug him, not yet, but he uncrossed his arms. And when Daniel looked up at him, the boy gave the smallest nod. Not trust, not yet, but the possibility of it. Clara watched them, her heart breaking and mending all at once. She wanted to believe, but belief had cost her too much before. Just then, Isabella appeared at the edge of the tent, her wedding gown trailing behind her like a ghost. Daniel, she called, voice icy. Your mother is asking for you. The photographers are waiting for the couple's portraits. He didn't look at her. Tell them I won't be taking any. Her breath hitched. You're choosing this over everything we built. I'm choosing to build something real, he said softly. Isabella's eyes flicked to Clara, then to the children. For the first time, something like fear crossed her face. Not of losing Daniel, but of realizing that the life she'd curated so carefully had no soul. She turned and walked away without another word. The night deepened. Guests began to whisper, to slip away, unsure whether to mourn a wedding or witness a rebirth. Mrs. Delaney approached, placing a gentle hand on Clara's arm. You don't have to decide anything tonight, she murmured. Let him prove it. Words are easy. Time is the true test. Clara nodded, tears glistening. I know. Daniel stood, still holding Sophia's hand, Lucas now walking beside him. Where are you staying? He asked. The same place we always do, Clara said simply. Above the laundromat. Room 3B. He smiled faintly. I remember the smell of lavender detergent. You remembered that. I remember everything, he said quietly. Even the nights I told myself I didn't. As they walked toward the parking lot. No limousine this time, just a modest sedan waiting under the moonlight. Daniel kept hold of Sophia's hand, and after a few steps, Lucas reached out and took his other one. No words were needed. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Trust would have to be rebuilt brick by brick. Wounds would ache in the quiet hours. But for the first time in years, the path wasn't leading away from something. It was leading home. And as the car pulled onto the quiet street, disappearing into the night, the grand estate behind them glittered like a dream already fading. Because real life doesn't happen under chandeliers. The hum of tires on wet pavement and the occasional rustle of Sophia shifting in her sleep against the car window. Lucas sat up front beside Clara, eyes fixed on the passing streetlights, his small fingers tapping a rhythm only he understood. Daniel drove slowly, as if afraid that going too fast might shatter the fragile peace they'd just begun to weave. When they pulled up outside the familiar brick building, the one with the flickering neon laundry sign and the fire escape that doubled as a balcony, Clara turned off the engine. No one moved right away. You don't have to come up, she said softly, not unkindly, but with the caution of someone who's been burned too many times to trust warmth without checking for flames. Daniel looked at her, then at the dark windows of room 3B. I know, he said, but I want to, even if it's just to say goodnight properly. Lucas unbuckled his seatbelt. We have school tomorrow, he reminded, voice flat but not hostile. I know, Daniel repeated, and I'll be here when you leave, to walk you to the bus stop. If that's okay. Clara studied him. Not the suit, not the polished shoes, not the man who'd stood before a crowd moments ago, but the tired lines around his eyes, the way his hands still trembled slightly on the steering wheel. This wasn't performance. This was raw, real. She nodded. Okay. They climbed the narrow stairs together, the scent of lavender and warm cotton growing stronger with each step. Inside, the apartment was exactly as Daniel remembered, and yet completely different. The same worn couch, the same second-hand lamp, but now covered in drawings taped to the walls, a shelf of library books, tiny shoes lined neatly by the door. A life had grown here without him, but for him in a way he hadn't deserved. Sophia yawned, rubbing her eyes. Can Daddy tuck me in? Clara hesitated, just a heartbeat, then nodded. In the small bedroom, painted pale yellow with glow-in-the-dark stars stuck haphazardly on the ceiling, Daniel knelt beside Sophia's bed. She snuggled under the quilt, clutching her rabbit. Will you sing the old song? She whispered. He blinked. You remember that? I remember everything. She echoed his earlier words, smiling sleepily. His throat tightened. He cleared it, then began to hum. The off-key lullaby he used to sing years ago, the one about moonlight and brave little sailors. His voice was rough, uncertain, but he didn't stop. And when Sophia's breathing slowed into sleep, he stayed there, hand resting gently on her blanket, watching her chest rise and fall. In the hallway, Lucas stood leaning against the doorframe. "You forgot the part about the whale," he said quietly. Daniel looked up, surprised. "You remember that too?" "I wrote it down once," Lucas admitted. "After you left. I thought if I kept the words, maybe you'd come back and finish it." Daniel's eyes filled. He stood slowly, crouching to Lucas's height. "I'm so sorry I made you hold onto that alone." Lucas shrugged, but his voice wavered. "It's okay. Just don't forget the whale next time." "I won't," Daniel promised, voice thick. "And I'll tell you the whole story tomorrow. Every part." Back in the living room, Clara stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the street below. She didn't turn as Daniel approached. "He asked me to walk him to the bus stop tomorrow," Daniel said. "I heard." A long silence stretched between them. Not awkward, but weighted with everything unsaid. "Clara," he finally whispered. "Do you think we can ever go back?" She turned then, eyes glistening but steady. "We can't go back, Daniel. But maybe we can go forward. Slowly, carefully, with honesty." He nodded. "That's all I'm asking for." She walked to the kitchenette, poured 2 glasses of water. No wine, no ceremony, just simple, real things, and handed him one. "You'll stay tonight on the couch, if you'll let me." "I'll let you," she said. "But not because I trust you yet. Because the kids do, and their hearts matter more than my fear." He accepted the glass, their fingers brushing briefly. "Thank you." Later, as he lay on the couch wrapped in a thin blanket that smelled faintly of sunshine and soap, Daniel stared at the ceiling, listening to the soft sounds of the apartment. The creak of floorboards, the distant hum of the city, the quiet breaths of the people he'd abandoned and somehow, miraculously, still had a chance to love. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a success. He felt like a man waking up. Outside, the night deepened. But inside room 3B, something fragile and beautiful had taken root. The door, humming the lullaby he'd sung the night before. Lucas stood by the window watching the street. "You're still here," Lucas said without turning. Daniel rubbed his face. "I said I would be." Sophia ran over, throwing her arms around his waist. "You didn't disappear." He hugged her tightly, breathing in the scent of baby shampoo and toast. "No more disappearing," he whispered. Clara handed him a mug of coffee. Black, just how he used to take it. "You remember that too?" he asked, surprised. "I remember everything," she said simply, and the words carried the weight of 5 years of silence, longing, and quiet endurance. Before he could respond, a sharp knock echoed at the door. Everyone froze. Clara frowned. Who could that be this early? She opened the door, and Isabella stood there, still in last night's ivory dress, though now wrinkled and smudged with mascara under her eyes. Her hair was loose, her usual poise frayed at the edges. "Daniel," she said, voice tight, "we need to talk." He stepped forward, instinctively shielding the children slightly with his body. "I say, what are you doing here?" "I waited all night," she said, ignoring Clara completely. "At the hotel, at your penthouse, even called your assistant. No one knew where you were." Her voice cracked. "Did you really just leave?" "I'm where I should have been a long time ago," he said gently. Isabella's gaze flicked past him, to the tiny apartment, the second-hand furniture, the children watching with wide eyes. Disbelief twisted her features. This is where you belong after everything we built." "We didn't build anything real, I say," he said. "We built an image. And last night, I realized I don't want to live inside a frame anymore." Her breath hitched. For the first time, the armor cracked. "Was I not enough?" "It's not about you," he said, pained. "It's about me finally seeing what I walked away from. You deserve someone who chooses you with his whole heart, not someone who's still running from his own." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. "Don't make me the villain in your redemption story, Daniel. I loved you the way you let me love you." "I know," he said softly, "and I'm sorry I couldn't give you more." She looked at Clara then, really looked at her. Not with jealousy, but with something like reluctant awe. "You stayed," she murmured, "even when he left." even when he forgot. Clara met her gaze without flinching. I stayed for them, not for him. Isabella nodded slowly, as if understanding something fundamental. Then she turned to Daniel one last time. The engagement is off. The contracts, the press statements, I'll handle it. But don't contact me again. Don't send flowers. Don't write letters. Just disappear from my life the way you appeared in hers. And with that, she turned and walked down the stairs, her heels clicking like a countdown ending. Inside, silence settled once more. Sophia tugged Daniel's sleeve. Was that your new wife? No, sweetheart, he said, kneeling. She was going to be. But some things aren't meant to be, especially when they're built on sand. Lucas crossed his arms. So, you're not getting married? Not today, Daniel said. Not ever. Unless it's to someone who already knows my whole story, including the parts I'm ashamed of. His eyes met Clara's. She looked away quickly, busying herself with zipping Sophia's backpack. But her hands trembled. The school bus horn honked outside. Time to go, Clara said, voice steady. They walked downstairs together, the four of them. A strange, tentative constellation reforming after years of drifting apart. At the curb, Lucas hesitated before climbing aboard. Will you be here when I get back? Daniel knelt again. Every day, rain or shine. Lucas studied him, then gave a small nod and stepped onto the bus. Sophia hugged him extra tight. Don't forget the whale. I won't, he promised, kissing her forehead. As the bus pulled away, Clara stood beside him, arms crossed against the morning chill. You realize this isn't a fairy tale, right? There won't be grand gestures every day. Just laundry, homework, burnt toast, and bills. I don't want a fairy tale, he said. I want real, even if it's messy. She looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time he saw not just caution in her eyes, but the faintest glimmer of something else. Hope, forgiveness, maybe just the possibility of peace. I'll believe it, she said quietly. When I see it for 100 days straight, then I'll show up for 101, he replied. And as they turned to walk back upstairs, to the small apartment that suddenly felt less like wash dishes without being asked, and learned how Sophia liked her toast, lightly buttered, crusts cut off, and how Lucas needed silence before bed to process his day. He didn't push. He didn't perform. He simply was. But not everyone was ready to let the past rest. One evening, as Clara pinned a new dress for Mrs. Delaney and Daniel helped Sophia with her spelling words at the kitchen table, the doorbell rang. Not the usual knock of a neighbor or delivery. This was sharp, insistent. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and opened the door. Standing there was Daniel's uncle, Robert, tall, silver-haired, dressed in a suit that cost more than their monthly rent. Behind him stood two women from the wedding, distant cousins, faces tight with judgment. Clara, Robert said, voice smooth but edged like polished steel. We weren't sure you'd still be entertaining him. Daniel appeared behind Clara, protective but calm. Uncle Robert, what are you doing here? We came to talk sense into you, Robert said, stepping inside without invitation. The others followed, eyes scanning the modest apartment with thinly veiled disdain. This little arrangement isn't appropriate. You're causing a scandal. Clara crossed her arms. We're not hiding anything, and this is my home. Your home, one of the women scoffed. It's a shoebox above a laundromat. Sophia shrank back into the couch. Lucas stood up, jaw set. Daniel moved between them and the guests. Say what you came to say, then leave. Robert sighed, as if disappointed in a wayward child. Daniel, you threw away a future with Isabella. A woman of class, connections, legacy. For this, a woman who couldn't even keep you when you had nothing. Clara's breath caught. But before she could speak, Sophia's small voice cut through the tension. She kept us, she said, stepping forward, chin lifted. When Daddy left, Mama stayed. She worked all night so we could eat. She never cried in front of us. And she never said one bad word about him. Even when we asked why he didn't love us enough to stay. The room went silent. Lucas joined his sister. You think this place is small? It's full of love. Your big houses, they're empty. Robert blinked, stunned by the children's defiance. But it was Clara who spoke next, quietly, firmly, with a dignity that filled the room like light. I didn't keep Daniel, she said, looking directly at Robert. He walked away, but I kept them. And I taught them that worth isn't measured by bank accounts or last names, but by how you treat people when no one's watching. Robert's face flushed. This isn't about morality. It's about reputation. The Moretti name is being dragged through gossip columns. People are saying you've trapped him with guilt. Daniel stepped forward, voice low but unshakable. No one trapped me. I chose to come back, because I finally saw what real value looks like. And it's sitting right here. He gestured to Clara, to the children, to the worn but clean space where laughter had returned after years of silence. One of the women shifted uncomfortably. But the wedding, the alliance, it was all arranged for years. And I canceled it, Daniel said, because I realized I'd rather build something honest than inherit something hollow. Robert shook his head. You'll regret this. Success doesn't come from sentimentality. No, Clara said softly, but peace does. She walked to the door and held it open. Thank you for your concern, but this family is healing, and we don't need spectators. For a moment, no one moved. Then, with stiff nods, the women turned and left. Robert lingered, studying Daniel with something like sorrow. You were always my favorite nephew, he said quietly. I just wanted you to have everything I never did. I have it now, Uncle, Daniel replied. I just didn't know it until I lost it. Robert looked at Clara, really looked, and for the first time his expression softened. She raised good children, he admitted. That's no small thing. Then he left, closing the door gently behind him. Silence settled over the apartment. Sophia ran to Clara and hugged her legs. Lucas exhaled, shoulders slumping in relief. Daniel turned to Clara, eyes glistening. I'm sorry they came here. I didn't know they'd... It's okay, she interrupted, voice thick. They needed to see us, and we needed to show them who we are. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Daniel sat on the fire escape with Clara, sharing a cup of tea under the city stars. They'll keep talking, he said. The rumors, the judgments. Let them, she said, sipping her tea. We're not living for them anymore. He looked at her, really looked, and saw not the woman he'd left behind, but the woman who'd carried their world on her shoulders and never let it fall. I used to think success meant leaving this place, he murmured. Now I see it means coming back to it, with humility, with love, with truth. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder, just for a moment before pulling away. One day at a time, Daniel. One day at a time, he agreed. And as the city hummed below them, the quiet strength of their shared resolve rose higher than any gossip, any judgment, any grand estate. Because some victories aren't announced with fanfare. They're whispered in laundry-scented rooms, ate up, day after day, until his presence no longer felt like a guest, but like something returning to its rightful place. But healing isn't linear. And one rainy Tuesday evening, as thunder rolled in the distance and the laundromat below had long closed for the night, the past came knocking again, not in the form of judgmental relatives, but in the quiet ache of memory. Clara was folding laundry when Daniel appeared in the doorway of the tiny balcony, holding 2 mugs of tea. He handed her one without a word. They stood side by side, watching raindrops race down the fire escape railing. I dreamed about him last night, he said suddenly, voice low. My father. Clara didn't look at him, but her hands stilled on the towel she was folding. What happened? He left when I was 8. Just gone. No note. No explanation. I spent my whole childhood thinking it was because I wasn't enough. He let out a shaky breath. And when things got hard with us, I did the same thing. To my own kids. The rain fell harder now, drumming against the metal stairs like a heartbeat. I thought I was protecting them, he whispered. From my failure. From my shame. But all I did was make them feel abandoned. Just like I did. Clara finally turned to him. Her eyes were soft, but searching. Why are you telling me this now? Because I need you to know. I'm not asking for forgiveness to ease my guilt. I'm asking for a chance to be different. Not because I deserve it, but because they deserve better. A silence stretched between them, filled only by the rain and the distant wail of a siren. Then Clara set her mug down and stepped closer. Do you remember the night you left? The rain was just like this. Daniel flinched. I've never forgotten. You stood by the door, she said, voice trembling slightly. And you said, I'll come back when I'm someone. But Daniel, you were already someone. You were their father. That was enough. He looked down, shame burning in his chest. I didn't know how to be that man. But you're learning, she said gently. Every day you're choosing them, and that matters more than any success you ever built. He met her eyes then, really met them, and saw not pity, not anger, but a quiet understanding that went deeper than words. I don't know how to fix the years I lost, he admitted, voice breaking, but I want to spend every day trying. Clara reached out, slowly, and placed her hand over his where it rested on the railing. Her touch was warm, tentative, real. You don't have to fix the past, she said softly. You just have to honor it by being present now. Inside, Sophia called out from her room, voice sleepy. Daddy, can you check for monsters? Daniel smiled faintly. Always. He turned to go, but paused. Clara, do you think we could ever... He couldn't finish the sentence. The hope in it felt too fragile. She looked at him for a long moment, rain glistening in her hair. I don't know, she said honestly, but I know this love isn't about grand returns. It's about showing up even when you're scared, even when you've failed, even when the world says it's too late. He nodded, throat tight. Then I'll keep showing up. And as he disappeared into the dim hallway towards Sophia's room, Clara stayed on the balcony, watching the rain wash the city clean. Somewhere in the quiet, something shifted, not with fanfare, but with the gentle certainty of roots finding soil again. Because sometimes, the most powerful love stories aren't about first chances, but second ones. Earned, not given, built from his mug. His mind heavy with a decision he'd been circling like a bird afraid to land. He'd been offered a new opportunity, a partnership in a development firm across the country, a fresh start, a bigger office, more money, the kind of offer he once would have leapt at without hesitation. But now it felt like a test, because this time, fresh start didn't mean escape. It meant leaving again. He heard soft footsteps behind him. Clara stood in the doorway, wrapped in a faded robe, her hair loose over her shoulders. She didn't speak. She just poured herself a cup and sat across from him. You're thinking about it? She said after a long silence. He looked up, surprised. How did you know? Your eyes get quiet when you're weighing something heavy. She wrapped her hands around the mug. Is it a good offer? It's everything I used to want, he admitted. A corner office, equity, recognition. She nodded slowly, gaze steady. And what do you want now? The question hung between them like a thread pulled taut. He looked toward the hallway where the children still slept. I want to be here. Every school play, every scraped knee, every bedtime story. I don't want to miss another first, or be a voice on the phone saying, I'll visit soon. Clara studied him. Then why are you even considering it? Because part of me wonders if staying here, working odd jobs, sleeping on this couch is holding them back. Maybe they deserve more than this apartment. More than me trying to rebuild from nothing. Her expression softened, but her voice was firm. Daniel, listen to me. They don't need more things. They need you. Present. Steady. Real. That's the more they've been waiting for. He swallowed hard. What if I fail again? What if you don't? She countered gently. You've already done the hardest part. You came back. Now you just have to stay. Just then, Sophia shuffled into the room, rubbing her eyes. Daddy, are you leaving again? Daniel's heart stopped. No, sweetheart. Never again. She climbed onto his lap, resting her head on his chest. Good, because I had a dream last night that you turned into a balloon and floated away. He held her tighter. I'm not going anywhere. Lucas appeared in the doorway, backpack slung over one shoulder. "Did you finish the whale story yet?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Not yet, but I will. Today." Later that afternoon, while the kids were at school, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open. Clara watched from the sewing machine as he typed slowly, deliberately. When he finally closed the laptop, he let out a long breath. "I turned it down." She didn't cheer, didn't smile, just nodded. "Why?" "Because I realized something," he said, turning to face her. "Success isn't a place you go. It's who you become while you're standing still, with the people who matter." She set down her needle. "And who do you want to become?" He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time there was no performance, no ambition, no armor, just truth. "The man my children believe I am. The man you never stopped hoping I could be." Tears welled in Clara's eyes, but she blinked them away. "That man was always there, Daniel. You just had to stop running long enough to see him." He stood and walked to the window, watching the street below. "I used to think love was something you earned through achievement. But you loved me even when I had nothing. Even when I wasn't worthy." "I didn't love you for your success," she said softly. "I loved the man who sang off-key lullabies and carried Lucas on his shoulders. That man never disappeared. He just got lost." He turned back to her, eyes glistening. "Can we find him together?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she rose, walked to the closet, and pulled out a small box from the top shelf. Inside were photos, birthday parties, park days, sleepy mornings, moments he'd missed. She handed him one, Lucas at 5, holding a drawing that read, "My dad is the best." "He made that the week after you left," she whispered. "He kept it on his wall for years." Daniel traced the paper with trembling fingers. "I don't deserve this." "No," she agreed gently. "But you're choosing to earn it now. And that's what matters." Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light across the worn floorboards. In that moment, the apartment didn't feel small, felt sacred. Because sometimes, the greatest act of courage isn't chasing a dream. It's staying put, facing your failures, and choosing, every single day, to love the people you once walked away from. And as Daniel held that fragile piece of paper, the ghost of a promise he'd broken, he knew his real work wasn't building empires. Bank account under his children's names. Not as a grand gesture, but as a promise written in numbers, not words. But peace, even when earned, is fragile. One evening, as Clara stirred soup on the stove and Sophia drew at the table, Lucas came home from school with a letter clutched in his hand. His face was pale. "What is it?" Daniel asked, kneeling beside him. Lucas didn't speak. He just handed him the envelope. Daniel opened it slowly. Inside was an invitation, not to a wedding this time, but to a charity gala hosted by Isabella's family. At the bottom, in elegant script, special tribute to Daniel Moretti, visionary, philanthropist, and future son-in-law. His blood ran cold. Clara looked over his shoulder, her breath catching. "They're still calling you that." Before he could answer, the phone rang. It was Isabella. Daniel hesitated, then picked up. I can explain." "I'm not calling about the gala," she said, her voice calm, too calm. "I'm calling because your mother's been admitted to the hospital. Heart complications. She's asking for you." He froze. "Is she?" "She's stable, but she's weak, and she keeps saying your name." Silence stretched between them, thick with history. "Thank you for telling me," he finally said. "I didn't do it for you," Isabella replied softly. "I did it for her. She never stopped loving you, even when you disappeared." He hung up, hands shaking. Clara placed a hand on his arm. "Go. She's your mother. But what about? The kids and I will be here," she said firmly. "This isn't running, Daniel. This is responsibility. Go be her son." That night, he drove to the hospital alone. The halls were sterile, quiet, humming with the soft beeps of machines. His mother lay in bed, frail beneath white sheets, her silver hair spread across the pillow like moonlight. "Mijo," she whispered when she saw him, tears filling her eyes. You came. He took her hand, rough with age, and knelt beside the bed. I'm sorry I wasn't here. You were lost, she said gently. But you're back now. That's what matters. She squeezed his hand. I heard about the wedding, about Clara, about the children. A faint smile touched her lips. You finally chose love over pride. He bowed his head. I'm trying. Good, she murmured. Because love isn't a destination. It's a daily choice. And you've chosen well. Later, as he sat in the dim hospital room, watching her sleep, his phone buzzed. A message from Clara. Kids are asleep. They asked if you'd read them the whale story tomorrow. I told them you would. He typed back, tell them I'll add a lighthouse, so the sailors never get lost again. He stayed until dawn. When he returned to the apartment, exhausted but lighter, Clara was waiting with coffee and toast. No questions, just presence. How is she? She asked. Better, he said. And she asked about you. Said you must be extraordinary to raise such kind children. Clara looked down, a small smile playing on her lips. She's right about one thing. He raised an eyebrow. Which? That I'm raising them. She met his eyes. But you're finally helping. He didn't reply. He just reached across the table and covered her hand with his. This time she didn't pull away. Later that day, Daniel called the gala organizers. Remove my name, he said. And please, don't refer to me as future son-in-law. I'm not. Then he called Isabella. Thank you for telling me about my mother. There was a long pause. I saw a photo online, she said quietly. You at the bus stop with Lucas. You were fixing his shoelace. I was. You look peaceful. I am. Another silence. Then softly, goodbye, Daniel. Goodbye, ISA. He hung up, and for the first time in years there was no regret, only release. That evening, as the four of them ate dinner together, simple pasta, laughter over spilled milk, Sophia insisting the whale in the story needed a hat, Daniel realized something profound. He hadn't canceled a wedding to return to Clara. He'd canceled it to return to himself. And in this small apartment, filled with mismatched chairs and second-hand dreams, he'd finally found the life he'd been running toward all along. Not in wealth, not in applause, but in the quiet miracle of being known, now waited by the window every afternoon, not out of habit, but anticipation. Or how Sophia saved half her sandwich at lunch for Daddy, even though he always packed his own. But the biggest change wasn't in the children, it was in Daniel. He no longer spoke of making up for lost time. He simply lived in the present, fully, fiercely. He attended parent-teacher conferences, helped Clara fix the radiator when it sputtered in February, and learned to sew a button back on Sophia's favorite coat. Badly, but with love. He still slept on the couch, not because Clara asked him to, but because he respected the space between them, the slow, sacred rebuilding of trust. Then came the evening of Lucas's school talent show. Clara stood backstage, adjusting her son's tie, a deep blue one Daniel had bought him. Because whales live in blue water, he'd said with a wink. Lucas fidgeted, palms sweating. What if I mess up the poem, he whispered. Daniel knelt, meeting his eyes. Then you'll be like me, human. And that's okay. Lucas looked at him, searching. You used to hate being human. You wanted to be perfect. Daniel's breath caught. I did. And it almost cost me everything. From the wings, Sophia tugged Clara's sleeve. Mama, is Daddy staying? After Clara glanced at Daniel, who stood quietly, watching his son with eyes full of pride and something softer. Awe, maybe, or grace. He's staying, she said firmly. The auditorium filled quickly. Parents in folding chairs, teachers with clipboards, siblings whispering excitedly. When Lucas's name was called, he walked to the center of the stage, paper trembling in his hands. He took a deep breath and began to read. My dad left once, not in a spaceship, not in a storm, just in silence. But he came back, not with gold or crowns, but with time, with bedtime stories, with shoelaces tied, with I'm sorry and I'm here. And I learned the bravest thing a man can do isn't building towers. It's kneeling down to say, I was wrong. Let me try again. A hush fell over the room. Some parents wiped their eyes. A teacher sniffled. Backstage, Daniel stood frozen, tears streaming silently down his face. Clara reached for his hand without thinking, and this time, their fingers laced together naturally, like they'd never been apart. After the show, as families hugged and cameras flashed, Lucas ran straight to Daniel and threw his arms around him. Did you like it? Daniel held him tightly, voice thick. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. Later, walking home under streetlights just beginning to glow, Sophia skipped ahead while Lucas walked between his parents. Quiet, content. You know, Daniel said softly, not looking at Clara but keeping his voice low, just for her. I used to think love was something you proved with grand gestures, but it's not. It's showing up for the small things. The poems, the shoelaces, the burnt toast. Clara smiled faintly. And the laundry. And the laundry, he agreed. They reached the building. As they climbed the stairs, Daniel paused outside the door to room 3B. Can I ask you something? She turned, keys in hand. Always. Do you think maybe I could stop sleeping on the couch? She didn't answer right away. She studied him, not with suspicion, but with the careful tenderness of someone guarding a fragile flame. Why? She asked. Because I don't want to just be present in their lives, he said, voice barely above a whisper. I want to be present in ours. If you'll have me. She looked down, then back up, eyes glistening. It's not about having you, Daniel. It's about trusting you. I know. Another silence. Then, slowly, she unlocked the door. The spare pillows in the closet, she said, stepping inside. And the blankets getting thin. He followed her in, heart pounding not with fear, but with hope. That night, for the first time in years, Daniel didn't sleep on the couch. He lay on a narrow mattress in the second bedroom, still separate, still respectful, but under the same roof, in the same quiet rhythm of breaths and dreams. And as he listened to the soft sounds of his children sleeping down the hall, and Clara moving gently in the kitchen, he realized redemption isn't a single moment. It's 1,000 small choices. To stay, to listen, to kneel, to love without expecting applause. And a performance. Even Clara had begun to relax. Not all at once, but in quiet ways, leaving her coffee cup on the table for him to wash, humming while he read bedtime stories, letting their shoulders brush in the narrow kitchen without pulling away. But trust, once broken, doesn't heal in a straight line. One evening, after tucking the kids in, Clara stood at the sink washing dishes. Daniel dried beside her, sleeves rolled up, forearms still dusted with chalk from helping Sophia with math. The silence between them was comfortable until it wasn't. Mrs. Delaney called today, Clara said, not looking up. Daniel paused. Oh, she's opening a small boutique downtown. Wants to sell my dresses. She finally turned to him, eyes searching. It's a real opportunity, but it means longer hours, maybe even hiring help. That's incredible, Clara, he said, genuine warmth in his voice. You deserve this. She nodded, but her fingers tightened around the dishcloth. There's something else. He waited. I'd need to move. The boutique has a studio above it. More space, better light, and it's closer to the kids' school. Daniel's breath caught. Move. As in, leave here. She looked down again. I don't want to rush anything, but staying here, it's tied to too much pain. For both of us. He set the plate down slowly. Are you asking me to go with you? She met his eyes then. Steady, honest, vulnerable. I'm not asking you to follow me, Daniel. I'm asking if you're ready to build something new with intention. Not because you have to, but because you want to. The question hung in the air like a held breath. He leaned against the counter, running a hand through his hair. I used to think love was about grand returns. Now I know it's about showing up every day, even when it's hard, even when you're scared. He looked at her, voice softening. I want to be where you are, not because I owe you, but because I choose you. Every single day. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. It won't be perfect. There will be days I doubt you. Days you'll feel like you're not enough. And I'll stay, he said firmly. Not to prove I've changed, but because I don't want to live without you seeing me try. Just then, Sophia appeared in the doorway, clutching her rabbit. Mama, Daddy, can I sleep in your room tonight? I had a dream the whale got lost again. Clara opened her arms. Of course, baby. As Sophia climbed onto the couch, still Daniel's bed for now, she looked up at them both. Will we all live together in the new place? Daniel and Clara exchanged a glance, a silent conversation passing between them in a heartbeat. Yes, Clara said softly. If Daddy wants to. Daniel knelt beside Sophia, brushing hair from her forehead. I do. More than anything. Later, after she fell asleep, they stood on the fire escape under a sky thick with stars. The city hummed below, but up here, it felt like the world had stilled just for them. You know, Clara said quietly, I never stopped loving you. I just stopped believing you'd ever come back. I came back broken, he admitted. But you didn't try to fix me. You just made space for me to heal. She leaned into him slightly, just enough for their arms to touch. Because love isn't about fixing people. It's about walking beside them while they find their way. He turned to her then, heart pounding. Clara, do you think we could ever? She placed a finger gently over his lips. Don't ask me to marry you yet. He blinked. I wasn't going to. She smiled faintly. Good, because I'm not saying yes to a ring. I'm saying yes to mornings making coffee together, to helping with homework, to fighting and forgiving, to building something real, one ordinary day at a time. He took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. Then that's what I'm asking for. And as the night wrapped around them like a promise, neither spoke again. They didn't need to, because sometimes the most powerful vows aren't spoken in front of crowds or sealed with diamonds. They're whispered in laundry-scented rooms, in shared silences, in the quiet courage of choosing each other not once, but every single day. Daniel had taken on extra shifts at the community center to help with rent, and Clara's dresses, simple, elegant, stitched with soul, were selling faster than she could make them. But it wasn't the success that filled the space, it was the laughter. The way Lucas now left his shoes by the door without being asked. How Sophia insisted on setting 4 places at the table, even when someone was late. How Daniel no longer knocked before entering, but simply called out, I'm home, as if he'd never left. Then came Sophia's 8th birthday. Clara had planned a small party in the courtyard behind the boutique, paper lanterns, cupcakes, a few friends from school. But when Daniel disappeared that morning, saying only, I'll be back before cake, Clara felt that old familiar knot tighten in her chest. Not fear, not exactly, but the ghost of it whispering he always leaves when things get real. She pushed it down. She trusted him. Didn't she? By 3 o'clock, children were laughing, frosting smeared on cheeks, balloons bobbing in the breeze. Sophia wore a new dress Clara had made, ivory with tiny embroidered stars, and kept glancing toward the gate. Do you think he forgot? She asked quietly, twisting a napkin in her hands. Clara knelt, brushing a curl from her daughter's forehead. He wouldn't, but as the minutes ticked past, doubt crept in like shadow. Then, just as Mrs. Delaney began to light the candles, a soft knock came at the courtyard gate. Daniel stood there, slightly out of breath, hair tousled, holding a lumpy, hand-wrapped box tied with twine. His shirt was stained with flour, his shoes dusty. I'm sorry I'm late, he said, voice rough with urgency. I wanted to make it myself. Sophia ran to him, throwing her arms around his waist. You came. He hugged her tightly, then knelt, placing the box in her hands. Open it. She tore the paper carefully, revealing a wooden music box. Carved into the lid was a whale swimming beneath a lighthouse, its beam cutting through stormy waves. She opened it, and a gentle melody began to play, the same off-key lullaby he used to sing. Tears filled her eyes. You remembered. I promised I would, he whispered. Clara watched from a few feet away, heart pounding. He hadn't just shown up, he'd crafted something, with his own hands, for her, for them. Later, after the guests had gone and the last cupcake was eaten, The four of them sat on the small balcony, sharing lemonade under string lights. Lucas held the music box, turning it over in his hands. "You made this?" he asked. "With help from Mr. Ruiz at the woodshop," Daniel admitted. "He taught me how to carve. Said every father should leave something behind that lasts longer than words." Lucas looked at him, then nodded slowly. "It's better than words." Sophia curled against Daniel's side, already half asleep. "Will you stay for the whole night?" "Every night," he said, kissing her hair. Clara sat beside him, their shoulders touching. She didn't speak for a long time. Then, softly, "You could have bought something fancy. From a store." He turned to her, eyes earnest. "I didn't want to give her something perfect. I wanted to give her something true. Made with my hands, my mistakes, my love." Clara's breath caught. She reached for his hand, fingers intertwining like roots finding soil. "That's all we've ever needed." He looked at her, really looked, and in that gaze was everything: regret, hope, devotion, humility. "I used to think love was about giving grand things," he murmured. "Now I know it's about giving yourself even when you're imperfect, even when you're scared." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You're not scared anymore." "I am," he admitted. "But I'm more afraid of losing you again." The city hummed below them, but up here, time seemed to slow. The children slept against them, warm and trusting. The music box played its simple tune on repeat, a lullaby of second chances. And in that quiet moment, Clara realized redemption isn't found in limousines or grand entrances. It's found in flower-stained shirts, in handmade gifts, in showing up. Not once, but the true transformation wasn't in their work. It was in the silence between them. The kind that no longer held ghosts, but comfort. The kind where a shared glance over morning coffee said more than years of apologies ever could. One evening, as rain tapped gently against the windows and the children were tucked in bed, Daniel sat on the couch reading aloud from a book Lucas had brought home, The Boy Who Built a Lighthouse. Clara sat beside him, mending a tear in Sophia's favorite dress, her fingers moving with practiced ease. He paused mid-sentence. "Remember how I thought success meant leaving this life behind?" She didn't look up, but a small smile touched her lips. "I remember. I thought if I could just be someone important, I'd finally feel like enough." He closed the book gently, setting it aside. "But standing in that wedding hall, watching you walk in with our children, I realized I'd already had everything that mattered. And I threw it away out of fear." Clara finally met his eyes. "You didn't throw it away forever. You came back. Because you left the door open," he said softly. "Even when you had every reason to lock it." She set her needle down. "I didn't leave it open for you, Daniel. I left it open for them. For the chance that one day, their father might remember who he really was." He reached for her hand, turning it over in his own, tracing the calluses from years of sewing, of holding on. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed? Every day?" she admitted. "But I don't live in that world anymore. I live in this one, the one where you chose to return, where you show up, where you love them even when it's hard." He swallowed hard. "And what about you? Do you think you could ever trust me with your heart again, not just as their father, but as yours?" The question hung in the air like a leaf suspended in wind, fragile, trembling, full of possibility. She looked down, then back up, eyes glistening. "Trust isn't given all at once, Daniel. It's built, brick by brick, day by day, and you've laid so many." He leaned closer, voice barely above a whisper. "Then let me keep building." Outside, the rain softened to a hush. Inside, the space between them seemed to breathe. Just then, Sophia appeared in the hallway, clutching her music box. "Mama, Daddy," the whale song stopped. Daniel stood immediately. "Let me fix it." As he knelt beside her, carefully opening the tiny mechanism, Clara watched him. His focused brow, the tenderness in his hands, the way Sophia leaned into him without hesitation. This wasn't the man who fled in the rain. This was the man who stayed through storms. Later, after the music played again and Sophia drifted back to sleep, Daniel returned to the living room. Clara hadn't moved. He sat beside her, not too close, not too far. I used to think dignity was something you wore, like a suit or a title. But you taught me it's something you carry inside. Even when you have nothing. She turned to him, tears in her eyes. And you taught me that people can change. Not because they want to impress the world, but because they finally see what they almost lost. He took a deep breath. There's something I've been carrying. From his pocket, he pulled a small velvet box. Not flashy, not expensive. Just simple, worn at the edges from being held too often. Clara's breath caught. Daniel? It's not a proposal, he said quickly, sensing her hesitation. Not yet. It's a promise. He opened it. Inside wasn't a ring, but a single white rose, preserved in glass, just like the ones Mrs. Delaney had given the children on the wedding day. I kept it, he said, all this time, because it reminded me that some things are worth protecting, even when they're fragile, even when they've been broken. Clara reached out, fingertips brushing the glass. Why now? Because I need you to know. I'm not asking for your past. I'm asking to walk into the future with you. Side by side. No grand gestures. No limousines. Just us. Building something real. She looked at him, really looked, and saw not the groom who once sought to shame her, but the man who'd knelt in gardens, fixed music boxes, and learned to braid hair with clumsy fingers. And in that moment, she understood the title had been wrong all along. It wasn't about him inviting her to shame her. It was about her arriving with grace, with love, with their children, and showing him the mirror he desperately needed. She took the box gently, then placed her hand over his. Keep building, she whispered. I'm here. And as the rain whispered against the glass, the past finally released its grip, not with fanfare, but with resilience. And above it, in their apartment, the scent of cinnamon and pine filled the air. It was Christmas Eve. Lucas and Sophia were asleep, exhausted from wrapping last-minute gifts and arguing over who got to place the star on the tiny tree Daniel had brought home from the community center lot. Now, only the soft crackle of the space heater and the distant chime of church bells broke the silence. Clara sat by the window, knitting a scarf, deep green, like the dress she'd worn that night at the wedding. Daniel stood behind her, 2 mugs of cocoa in hand. He set one beside her, then leaned against the sill, watching snowflakes spiral down. Remember that night, he asked softly. When you walked in with them, I thought I was showing everyone how far I'd come. But really, I was just standing in front of the one thing I'd thrown away. Clara smiled faintly, not looking up from her needles. I wasn't trying to shame you, Daniel. I just wanted my children to see that dignity isn't about what you wear. It's about how you carry yourself when the world expects you to shrink. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. You didn't just carry yourself. You carried us. All these years. She finally looked at him, eyes soft with memory. Because love isn't a feeling. It's a choice. And every morning I chose them, even when it hurt. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn at the edges, creased from being opened too many times. It was Sophia's crayon card from the wedding day. I love you even when you're far. I read it every night, he admitted, voice rough. Even now, because it reminds me that love doesn't keep score. It waits. It hopes. It believes. Clara set her knitting down and took his hand. And what do you believe now? He turned to her, snowlight catching in his eyes. I believe that the greatest success isn't measured in wealth or applause, but in the quiet moments no one sees. Like fixing a music box at midnight, or walking your son to school in the rain, or sitting with someone who's been through hell and saying, I'm here. He squeezed her hand. That's the life I want. With you. Outside, the snow fell thicker, blanketing the streets in stillness. Inside, something settled, deep, final, peaceful. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. You know, I used to think peace meant being alone, safe, unhurt. But real peace, it's choosing to be vulnerable again, to trust, to love, even after you've been broken. He kissed the top of her head. Then let's keep choosing it. Every day. Later, as they turned off the lights and Prepared for bed, Daniel paused in the hallway. Do you ever miss the old life, the penthouse, the parties? Clara shook her head, smiling. That wasn't a life. It was a performance. This, she gestured to the small apartment, the mismatched furniture, the drawings on the fridge, the sound of Sophia murmuring in her sleep. This is real. This is home. He followed her into the bedroom, their bedroom now, though neither had declared it aloud. Just slowly, naturally, their lives had woven together again, thread by thread. As he lay beside her in the dark, listening to the soft rhythm of her breath, Daniel realized something profound. He hadn't won back his family through grand gestures or public confessions. He'd won them back by showing up, day after ordinary day, with humility, presence, and love that asked for nothing in return. And Clara, she hadn't forgiven him because he deserved it. She'd forgiven him because she understood some souls need time to find their way back to grace. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the city in a blanket of white, clean, quiet, new. And inside, in a modest apartment above a boutique, a broken family had become whole again, not because they were perfect, but because they chose each other, again and again, in the beautiful, messy truth of everyday love. And